welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're embarking on a really lengthy and serious exploration into a formative and often pretty brutal period in early American history. We're talking about the years between 1800 and 1810. We've gathered a whole collection of historical accounts.
Right.
And our mission, really, is to conduct a serious, in-depth examination. We want to look at prominent murder cases, but also other kinds of violence, injustice, things that really marked this era.
Yeah, things like, politically motivated conflicts, the just horrific realities of slavery, and the biases that were kind of baked into the legal system back then, which was still pretty new.
Exactly. The goal is to pull out some real insights into crime, justice, and, the whole social dynamic of this young nation.
Indeed. And for this deep and serious examination, our sources give us a lot of different viewpoints. Some seem pretty sensationalized, almost like early tabloid reporting on crime.
Right.
While others are more, sober discussions about political violence or the really stark, unavoidable realities of systemic injustice. It's quite a mix. Sometimes disturbing, actually.
It really is
Yeah.
a diverse set of lenses to look through this pivotal decade.
Definitely.
And it was undeniably a tumultuous time. I mean, the nation was still finding its feet, grappling with huge issues. How do you set up a fair legal system? While at the same time, you've got these deeply entrenched social hierarchies and, of course, the horrific institution of slavery.
Yeah, the cases we're going to dissect, they aren't just isolated incidents, are they? They're symptoms.
Symptoms of what, exactly?
Symptoms of the broader anxieties, the contradictions, the often brutal facts of life in that era.
We're definitely going to be looking at some compelling and, frankly, deeply disturbing cases. Stuff that cast a really long shadow on how American society and its ideals developed.
Absolutely. And to kick off this extended exploration, where better to start than a case often called America's First Mystery?
The Manhattan Well murder.
Ex-
Okay, let's really unpack this one. New York City, turn of the 19th century. It's completely different from today.
Oh, vastly different.
You've got this bustling port town, maybe 60,000 people, muddy streets, dimly lit. And what's really striking is there's basically no formal police force. Not like we think of it.
Right. You had night watches, maybe, but it was nothing like a modern organized law enforcement agency.
Not at all.
And that's such a crucial point to grasp right from the start. With no dedicated police, no established forensic methods, investigating crimes, it fell very heavily on local magistrates, volunteers.
Just pitching in.
Pretty much. And their efforts were often, limited. Understanding this somewhat chaotic context is absolutely vital if you want to truly get how these early cases played out.
Yeah, the challenges people face trying to find justice, and also the potential for things to go badly wrong. Miscarriages of justice.
Precisely.
So, into this environment where law enforcement is, let's say, rudimentary, steps Cleoma Sands,
Ilma.
they call her.
Ilma Sands, yep.
Just 22 years old. She's working as a maid at the Ring boarding house on Greenwich Street.
Okay.
Most accounts say she was quiet. But, even in a boarding house back then, rumors, they can spread fast.
Oh, absolutely. Like wildfire.
And in Elna's case, those rumors often seem to involve a man named Levi Weeks.
Right, Levi Weeks. He was a carpenter, 24 years old, also living at the Ring boarding house.
Ah, okay. So they lived in the same place.
Exactly. And the whispers going around strongly suggested, a romantic link between them. Maybe even something more serious, like an engagement, was expected. And back then, relationships like that, especially if they maybe crossed social lines or involved unspoken ideas about marriage, they could get really tense, even dangerous. The pressure, the potential for scandal, it was huge.
Right. So then, December 22nd, 1799, Elma just disappears.
Vanishes.
It's about 8 o'clock at night. There's snow on the ground. She's wearing a white dress, carrying a red muff, quite distinctive. And she apparently told another boarder she was going out to meet someone. But she didn't say who.
And that right there is the central mystery, isn't it? The fact she said she was meeting someone, then disappeared. It immediately casts a shadow.
Yeah, who was it?
And even that detail about her clothes, the white dress, the red muff, it might seem minor, but back then, it could have subtly signaled something about her intentions, how formal the meeting was, maybe even the status of the person she was meeting. Social cues were everything.
Interesting. So days go by, turn into a week.
Yeah.
The Rings, who ran the boarding house, they were also Elma's cousins.
Right. Family.
Understandably, they start to panic.
Yeah.
And then January 2nd, 1800.
Yeah.
A really grim discovery.
Yeah. Some boys were playing near Lispenard's meadow. It was kind of undeveloped then.
Okay.
And they stumbled upon Elma's body in the Manhattan well, a public water
That's
source.
horrific. In the well itself.
Yes.
Wow.
And the state of her body, from the reports, deeply disturbing. Bruises, signs she'd been strangled. Her dress was torn.
He struggled then.
Clearly, a violent struggle. The coroner officially confirmed it was murder, and that sent, well, huge shockwaves through the city. It was still relatively small then.
Yeah, 60,000 people. That would be huge news.
Absolutely. This wasn't just someone missing. A brutal crime had happened.
And with no real police force, the whole investigation was, well, kind of improvised, wasn't it?
Ad hoc is a good word for it. Local magistrates, concerned volunteers stepped in. They did their best with what they had, which wasn't much in terms of resources or expertise.
Right. And one key piece of evidence turned up fairly early on.
The muff.
Elma's red muff found inside the well.
Yeah, that physical clue strongly suggested a struggle happened right there at the well.
It's really compelling detail, isn't it?
Yeah.
It implies she was definitely at that spot and some kind of physical fight happened.
Exactly. And that discovery immediately focused the early investigation, such as it was, on anyone who might have had a reason to meet her near that well.
Which brings us, almost inevitably, back to Levi Weeks.
Right. He quickly became the prime suspect in the public eye and probably for the magistrates, too.
People had seen him with Elma the night she disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe even more damning in a lot of people's eyes was this report of a sleigh.
Ah, yes, the sleigh.
Later linked to his brother, Ezra, seen near the well around the time she vanished.
Crucial circumstantial evidence.
Levi, though, he claimed he was home by 10 p.m. that night. That was his alibi.
And the timing here is absolutely critical. You've got eyewitnesses, maybe unreliable, but placing him with Elma.
Yeah.
You've got the sleigh nearby, maybe used to move her body. It paints a suspicious picture, especially when there's no other obvious suspect.
But his alibi,
Yeah.
if that held up.
Exactly. If he could prove he was home by 10, that's a big problem for the prosecution. Even back then, you theoretically needed proof beyond a reasonable doubt.
And then came the whispers, the rumors swirling around Levi's motive.
The pregnancy rumors?
Right. The most persistent one was that Elma Sands was pregnant, and that Levi Weeks, well, that he might have killed her to avoid the scandal.
An unwed pregnancy in that society.
Hmm?
The shame would have been immense.
But we have to stress, these were just rumors, right? No concrete proof has ever surfaced.
Absolutely vital to remember, mostly just rumors. But you have to understand the potential for social ruin back then. Pregnancy outside marriage. It could mean being cast out, poverty, a lifetime of stigma for the woman and the child.
So while it's speculation,
While speculative, the fear of those consequences, it could provide a motive, a deeply disturbing one for someone desperate to keep their social standing.
and public opinion was really divided on whether he was guilty, wasn't it?
Massively divided, which really shows you the power of those kinds of rumors and how hard it was to find the truth without a proper investigation.
What's also really striking and honestly quite unsettling when you look back is the contrast.
How so?
Well, all this intense focus on Elma's case compared to other crimes happening in New York around the same time.
Right, the ones that barely got mentioned.
Exactly. You read about a sailor stabbed on the docks, some boarder found dead in an alley. These seem almost like background noise, a grim part of city life.
Accepted, almost.
Yeah. So it makes you ask, why did Elma's case grab everyone's attention like that? At all the potential tragedies.
That's a really insightful question. Probably several things feeding into it. Maybe her perceived vulnerability, young, unmarried woman, the mystery of her disappearing from, a seemingly stable home, and then the shock of finding her body in a place associated with life, not death.
Right.
And it happened just as newspapers were becoming a much bigger deal, shaping public discussion.
The media angle.
Definitely. Elma's story had all the drama, mystery, possible romance gone wrong, social intrigue, tragedy. It sold newspapers. It fed this growing public appetite for these kinds of stories.
While the other victims, maybe anonymous sailors or poorer folk, their stories just didn't resonate in the same way.
Likely not. Their lower social status, maybe, meant their deaths didn't capture the public imagination as powerfully.
And capture it, it did. The media frenzy around Elma's case was, well, it was something else for that time.
Pretty unprecedented.
Newspapers like the New York Spectator were printing every detail they could get, true or not.
Right, verification wasn't exactly the top priority sometimes.
Then these pamphlets started appearing, spreading wild tales, just sensationalizing everything.
It really does feel like you're watching the birth of true crime obsession in America.
Doesn't it?
Absolutely. This tragedy marks a real turning point in how crime was reported, discussed, consumed by the public, the newspapers, the pamphlets. They turned a local tragedy into this huge public spectacle.
Setting a precedent, really.
Yeah, setting the stage for how sensational crimes would be handled by the media for years to come.
Okay, so fast forward to March 1800. Levi Weeks goes on trial for Elma's murder.
The big event.
The courtroom was reportedly jammed, people from all walks of life. The whole city was basically holding its breath.
Hmm.
And this is where it gets really interesting. Levi Weeks' defense team,
Ah, yes. The star power.
Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton.
Yeah. Two absolute titans of early American politics and law. Their involvement just instantly elevates this trial way beyond a local murder case.
It says a lot about the resources Weeks had access to, right? Probably through his brother.
Almost certainly. Ezra Weeks was quite successful. It also shows you how closely law and top-level politics were intertwined back then. Personal connections could really matter in the justice system.
So the prosecution's argument was pretty straightforward.
Levi killed Elma to hide the secret, the assumed pregnancy, the potential shame.
Makes sense. But Burr and Hamilton, with all their legal skill, they mounted a strong defense.
Oh, absolutely. From what we can piece together, their strategy was pretty sophisticated. They worked hard to discredit the prosecution witnesses.
Pick apart their stories.
Exactly. Challenged the circumstantial nature of the evidence, the sleigh being seen nearby.
Uh-huh.
And they even threw out alternative theories about how Elma died, however unlikely they might have seemed.
Just having those two defending him must have had a huge impact. Psychologically, maybe?
Undoubtedly. On the jury, on the whole atmosphere of the trial.
And the trial itself was incredibly quick by today's standards. Just 2 days.
Remarkable, isn't it? Witnesses testified they saw Weeks near the well. The sleigh was key circumstantial evidence.
But Burr, known for being sharp,
Relentlessly cross-examined them, trying to find inconsistencies, undermine their credibility.
and then Hamilton, he suggested suicide.
Yeah, which seems, well, pretty audacious, given the clear evidence of strangulation found on her body.
Right. The coroner's report seemed pretty definite.
It did, but suggesting suicide, even if it flew in the face of the facts, might have been a tactic.
How so?
Plant a seed of doubt. Just introduce an alternative, even an implausible one, to maybe sway one or two jurors. Create that reasonable doubt needed for acquittal.
And the jury deliberated very quickly,
Astonishingly quickly.
which suggests the defense's strategy, attacking witnesses, questioning evidence, floating alternatives combined with the inherently circumstantial nature of the case against Weeks.
It worked.
Then the verdict came back. Not
Uh-huh.
guilty.
Not guilty. Levi Weeks walked free.
And the public reaction.
Fury. Widespread disbelief and anger based on the accounts. A lot of people felt a major injustice had happened.
Lingering questions then about wealth, influence, good lawyers, maybe overriding justice.
Exactly. Those suspicions persisted long after the trial. Even with what many saw as weak evidence against him, a huge chunk of the public remained convinced he was guilty.
It really highlights that tension, doesn't it? Between the formal legal outcome and what the public believes happened.
Absolutely. When a jury verdict doesn't match popular opinion, especially when factors like wealth and top lawyers seem involved, it can really shake people's faith in the system itself.
So reflecting on it now, all this time later, what are the main theories about who actually killed Elma Sands?
Well, you've still got Levi Weeks. Suspicious circumstances, the relationship, the sleigh, but no smoking gun, no definitive proof.
Right. Still the prime suspects for many, but legally acquitted.
Then there's the possibility of just a random attacker. New York was a rough port city. Things happened.
Plausible, maybe, but no evidence pointing that way specifically.
None at all. No leads, no motive identified. And then you have Burr's suicide theory.
Which, as we said, seems really weak given the strangulation evidence.
Extremely weak. Very hard to reconcile with the coroner's findings.
So at the end of the day,
Despite all the attention, all the pamphlets, the trial, we still don't know for sure who killed Elma Sands. It's tragically unresolved, lost to history and speculation.
but the case itself, even without a resolution, left a huge mark on American culture, didn't it?
Undeniably, it really seemed to spark that lasting American fascination with true crime.
The pamphlets, the ballads people wrote about her.
even early detective stories drawing inspiration from it. And it's quite something that the actual well
Still exists.
still exists, apparently in the basement of a building in Soho now, a kind of eerie reminder of this foundational true crime obsession.
Wow.
Yeah. Her story's endurance really speaks to that human pull towards mystery, especially stories involving love, betrayal, social intrigue, potential injustice.
Things that grab us.
Exactly. The fact it became immediate fodder for popular culture shows its impact, while countless other crimes from that era are forgotten.
Because of poor records, lack of investigation.
Georgia's failing to capture public interest. Elma Sand's case stands out. It really is arguably the start of America's preoccupation with true crime narratives.
And it also throws the flaws of the justice system back then into really sharp relief.
Oh, absolutely. No trained detectives, no forensics. Investigations relied almost totally on eyewitnesses and circumstantial clues.
Well, highly prone to error, bias.
Exactly. And then there's the glaring disparity based on social standing and money, both for the victim and the accused. It raises serious questions about equal justice.
Elma, as a working-class woman, got sympathy, sure.
But did that translate into a rigorous, fair investigation? Maybe not.
While Levi Weeks, with his family's apparent wealth and Burr and Hamilton defending him,
Clearly benefited from a system that could be influenced by status and resources.
and all those other forgotten victims from that time.
They're a stark reminder of a system that often failed people on the margins, highlighting the deep inequalities built into the legal structures of the early republic.
Okay, let's shift gears now. We're moving from that New York mystery to something very different, but just as serious, just as consequential. The Burr-Hamilton duel, 1804.
Right. Not a back alley crime, this one.
No, this is violence right at the top. Highest levels of American political power. And it wasn't just personal, was it?
Not at all. It reflected the incredibly fractured, partisan political scene of the early 19th century and this long, bitter rivalry between Vice President Aaron Burr and the founding father Alexander Hamilton.
What was the root of it all?
Years of clashes, political battles, Hamilton constantly saying negative things about Burr's character, both privately and sometimes publicly.
Okay.
The final straw, apparently, was a particularly nasty letter in 1804. Hamilton either wrote it or at least approved of it being circulated.
And Burr saw this as an attack on his honor.
A deep insult to his personal and professional honor. That was the immediate trigger for Burr issuing the challenge to a duel, a practice, still controversially, accepted in some elite circles then.
So July 11th, 1804, Weehawken, New Jersey, across the river from New York.
The famous dueling grounds.
These two huge figures meet at dawn to settle this with pistols. It's almost hard for us to wrap our heads around that now, isn't it?
It really is, this ritualized violence
Yeah.
where honor supposedly trumped life itself.
Were duels common then?
Increasingly controversial, seen as archaic even then by many. But yes, among certain elite groups, political figures, military officers, it was still a recognized, if highly formalized, custom.
Tied up with reputation, defending your name.
Exactly. Personal honor was paramount. Any perceived slight had to be answered. And the setting in Weehawken, those cliffs over the Hudson, it adds this almost theatrical, tragic feel to it.
So what happened at the duel itself?
Well, the accounts say the seconds paced out the distance, the pistols were presented, the whole ritual. They raised their weapons, shots were fired.
And Hamilton was hit.
Yes. Mortally wounded in the abdomen. He died the next day.
And Burr.
Burr was unarmed, but he fled immediately afterwards. He faced murder charges in both New Jersey and New York.
But was he ever convicted?
No. Never brought to trial or convicted for Hamilton's death.
How did the public react?
Starkly divided. Hamilton, architected the financial system, Federalist leader. He was widely mourned, seen as a fallen hero.
And Burr.
Burr was widely condemned, painted as the villain who killed a beloved national figure.
But you mentioned dueling was still sort of accepted among elites.
It was, and that's a critical point. Burr faced serious charges because he was the vice president, and Hamilton was Hamilton. But deadly duels between less famous elites. They often happen with zero legal consequences. No investigation, nothing.
Wow. So a completely different standard depending on who you were.
Absolutely. The law could be applied very differently or not at all based on your social standing, your connections, your perceived honor.
It suggests that this code of honor, for some people, was almost above the actual law.
In practice, yes. These acts of violence were often shielded by that code. The Burr-Hamilton duel got intense focus only because of who they were. If it had been two lesser-known gentlemen,
Probably would have been ignored by the authorities.
very likely it would have attracted far less attention.
So digging deeper,
Mm.
why did Burr do it? Was it just about restoring his honor after Hamilton's attacks?
It was likely complex. Partly that, yes. Deep personal animosity, feeling his reputation was unfairly trashed by Hamilton for years. But maybe also a political calculation, a sense that his career was declining, and maybe this dramatic act could somehow revive it.
A misguided gamble, perhaps?
A profound miscalculation, it seems, because the scandal that followed did the exact opposite. It effectively ended his political career and stained his legacy permanently.
What about Hamilton's part in it? He wasn't exactly innocent in their feud.
No, definitely not. Years of inflammatory personal attacks against Burr.
And there's that whole debate about whether Hamilton intended to shoot Burr.
Right. Did he intentionally miss? Some historians argue his morals or religion might have made him fire wide.
Or did he intend to hit him?
Others argue duels were serious business. Maybe he intended to wound or kill Burr in self-defense, or as a final act in their feud.
But we don't know for sure.
No definitive proof, no clear statement from Hamilton beforehand. It remains speculation. But it's undeniable his words over the years fueled the fire that led to the duel.
And despite the public outcry, the murder charges, Burr got away with it, legally speaking.
He did. He hid for a while, then eventually returned to public life, though his reputation was shattered.
It really underlines that point again, doesn't it? How elites could navigate the legal system differently.
It starkly highlights the inconsistencies. Public opinion was against him, but the legal hurdles to convicting someone for duel, especially someone of that stature, they proved too high.
It reinforces that theme of wealth, status, connections, influencing justice.
Powerfully. Differential treatment under the law was a reality.
And looking beyond Burr Hamilton, you mentioned other elite killings, maybe disguised as duels or accidents.
It seems highly probable. These speculative accounts and just the understanding of the social norms then suggests the Burr-Hamilton duel wasn't unique, just uniquely public.
Violence among the powerful, framed as honor, often got a pass.
Exactly. It wasn't held to the same standard as violence among ordinary folk. The focus on Burr-Hamilton was because they were Burr and Hamilton. It shone a light on a darker side of the early republic's social landscape.
So the legacy of the duel, obviously the end of Hamilton's life.
And the effective end of Burr's national political career.
Did it change attitudes towards dueling?
It contributed slowly to growing anti-dueling sentiment, but it took many more decades for the practice to really die out.
And like Elma Sand's story, it's endured in public memory.
Absolutely, a dramatic, scandalous, cautionary tale from the nation's early years.
Both cases, Elma Sands and Burr Hamilton, though so different.
They offer invaluable insights into those volatile early years. Both grabbed the public imagination, exposed flaws in the justice system, and still fascinate us with their unresolved questions and stories of conflict and the search for justice.
Okay, let's shift focus again. We're continuing this serious exploration, moving now from political intrigue in the North to the brutal reality of slavery in the South. Specifically, Gabriel's Rebellion in Virginia, August 1800.
Right, and this isn't a typical murder case, one person killing another. It's about the systemic violence of slavery itself.
And the desperate, often violently crushed, fight for freedom by enslaved people.
Exactly. And the central figure here is Gabriel Prosser, an enslaved blacksmith in Virginia.
What was his story?
He was inspired, apparently, by the Haitian Revolution, which showed enslaved people could overthrow their oppressors.
A powerful example.
Hugely powerful, and Gabriel planned a large-scale rebellion aimed at ending slavery in Virginia. His vision was incredibly bold, tragically bold, given the circumstances.
What was the actual plan?
He recruited enslaved people, but also some free Black individuals. The target was Richmond, the state capital.
Ambitious.
Very. The goal was to seize the armory, get weapons, and then use that leverage to demand freedom. The date was set, August 30th, 1800.
That sounds incredibly complex and dangerous to organize in secret.
Immensely so.
Yeah.
It required huge organization, trust, absolute secrecy, in a society built on controlling enslaved people through violence and surveillance.
The scale of it, potentially hundreds or thousands involved across different counties.
Yeah.
It really shows the depth of the desire for freedom.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
But the risks, the vulnerabilities of trying to pull off something like that, Tragically, that's what led to its failure.
What went wrong?
Two major things. First, on the very day it was supposed to happen, a massive rainstorm hit. Flooding made the planned gathering and march on Richmond impossible.
Just bad luck. A natural disaster.
A fatal delay caused by nature. But then came the betrayal.
Ah, someone talked.
Yes, the secret plan was revealed to the white authorities by two enslaved men.
Why would they do that?
It's impossible to know their exact motives. Fear of reprisal if it failed, hope for some reward or better treatment. The pressures and choices within that system were unimaginable.
So the authorities found out.
Yes. Governor James Monroe acted immediately, mobilized the state militia with overwhelming force. Gabriel's rebellion was crushed before it could even really begin.
That quick, forceful response. It speaks volumes about the fear among slaveholders, doesn't it?
Constant, pervasive fear of uprisings. The betrayal, while tragic, highlights the incredibly difficult situation for enslaved people, and the authorities' reaction shows how terrified they were of organized resistance.
What happened after the plot was discovered? The crackdown.
Swift, brutal, merciless. The militia rounded up huge numbers of enslaved people suspected of being involved.
And Gabriel himself.
He escaped initially, but was caught soon after. And the trials, if you can even call them that,
Not exactly fair proceedings, I imagine.
a cruel mockery of justice. Rushed. No due process, no real legal rights for the accused. Gabriel and about 25 others identified as leaders were quickly convicted and hanged by October.
So, while the plot itself didn't involve specific murders,
The state's response certainly did. State-sanctioned violence on a significant scale. A stark demonstration of power in the slave system.
and this state violence, the unfair trials, the executions, it's a form of systemic injustice itself.
Absolutely. A particularly egregious form. They were denied basic rights, basic humanity. The severity of the punishment was meant to terrorize others, to suppress any thought of future resistance.
It makes you think about other, less documented violence related to slavery, too.
Exactly. How often might an overseer have been killed? Maybe in self-defense by someone pushed too far.
And what would have happened then?
Almost certainly immediate, brutal, extrajudicial retaliation against the enslaved community. No trial, no record, just terror.
Because the power imbalance was so total.
Precisely. Violence against enslaved people was often ignored, normalized, unpunished by law. Violence by them, even in self-defense, was met with swift, public, merciless brutality. Their dehumanization under the law meant their experiences of violence were largely unrecorded,
The racial tension in the South must have been just constant.
palpable. This pervasive fear of rebellion shaped everything, led to harsher laws, more brutal control.
And it's such a stark contrast to how, say, Elma Sand's murder was handled in the North.
A world of difference. Elma's case, for all its flaws, had public outcry, a formal investigation, a trial attempting some form of justice.
Right. Imperfect, but an attempt.
Gabriel's rebellion, met with immediate, overwhelming state repression. It just highlights the fundamental inequality, the prioritization of slavery over any idea of justice or human rights for the enslaved.
Did Gabriel's rebellion have any lasting impact, even though it failed?
Definitely. It didn't stop the desire for freedom. If anything, it probably fueled resistance, even if it had to be more secret.
And the reaction from the state?
They cracked down even harder. Virginia passed stricter slave laws, restricting freedoms even more, out of fear, paranoia.
So the whole episode just starkly reveals those deep fractures in early American society about justice, freedom, who even counted as human.
Exactly. It's a powerful reminder of that constant, violently suppressed struggle against an inhuman system. It didn't achieve freedom then, but it's part of that long narrative of resistance that eventually led to abolition after incredible struggle and bloodshed. The harsh reaction just shows how desperate the slaveholding class was to maintain control.
Okay, our final case for this deep dive takes us somewhere else entirely. Rural Massachusetts. Wilbraham, 1805.
Right. The murder of a farmer named Marcus Lyon.
And this case is significant not just for the crime itself, but for something truly remarkable that had almost 200 years later.
Yes, a development that forces a complete reevaluation of the original events.
So Marcus Lyon is found murdered, November 5th, 1805. Small town, Massachusetts. Seems like a robbery gone wrong.
That was the initial assumption in this quiet, close-knit rural community. But the investigation, the trial, and what happens centuries later, it reveals a much darker side of early American justice, especially concerning marginalized groups.
Who were the initial suspects?
The investigation quickly zeroed in on two Irish immigrants, Dominic Daly and James Halligan.
Arrested very quickly, you say?
Surprisingly quickly, especially for a rural investigation back then. And the speed itself raises red flags. Were biases at play from the start?
Because they were Irish immigrants.
Exactly. This was a time of intense anti-Irish feeling in many parts of America. In a mostly Anglo-Saxon Protestant town, they were outsiders, easily viewed with suspicion.
Vulnerable, then.
Extremely vulnerable to becoming scapegoats, especially if the evidence against them wasn't solid.
What was the crime scene like? What evidence did they have?
Lyon's body was found beaten and shot on a road. Robbery was the assumed motive. Daly and Halligan were known to be nearby around that time. Some witnesses claimed they saw them with Lyon earlier that day, but the reliability of that testimony later seriously questioned.
So circumstantial evidence, witness accounts.
Fairly flimsy circumstantial evidence, but in that atmosphere of strong anti-Irish prejudice, it was likely given far too much weight. The bias probably made them seem guilty in many eyes, even without strong proof.
And the trial? In spring 1806.
Crushed. Daly and Halligan were poor, uneducated immigrants. They couldn't afford a decent lawyer.
A huge disadvantage.
Massive, and the anti-Irish prejudice almost certainly infected the courtroom itself, influenced the jury, the whole process.
So the outcome was almost inevitable.
Pretty much. Given those factors, they were quickly convicted and sentenced to hang.
A chilling example of prejudice influencing justice.
Absolutely. No proper legal defense, strong bias in the community and courtroom. A fair trial was virtually impossible. It predetermined their fate.
But then comes the incredible twist. Nearly 180 years later.
Yeah.
1984.
Yes. Dominic Daly and James Halligan were officially posthumously exonerated by the state of Massachusetts.
Exonerated. Why?
The overwhelming reason was the undeniable proof of that pervasive anti-Irish bias. It had clearly skewed the original investigation and trial, leading to a catastrophic miscarriage of justice.
Wow. Was there any evidence pointing elsewhere?
There was even credible evidence suggesting a relative of one of the main witnesses against them might have been the actual killer, and that the flimsy evidence against Daly and Halligan was just accepted because of prejudice.
So Lyon's murder is actually still unsolved.
Officially, yes. The real killer was never identified, which adds another layer of tragedy.
That exoneration, so long after, it's a powerful indictment of how prejudice can wreck the justice system.
A chilling testament, really, to how bias leads to irreversible tragedies. It underscores the absolute need for rigorous investigation, competent legal defense for everyone, and constant vigilance against prejudice in the justice system then and now.
And this case makes you wonder about other forgotten rural crimes from that era.
Definitely. Farmers killed over land, travelers found dead. In remote areas with little law enforcement, cases could easily go cold.
And blame might fall on transients, outsiders.
People without connections to defend themselves. Especially in isolated communities, outsiders were easy targets when something went wrong and there's no clear evidence. Another flaw in the system, particularly in rural settings.
It really drives home that larger issue of systemic bias back then. It wasn't just anti-Irish prejudice.
No, it was wider, bias against various marginalized groups. And it contrasts so sharply with cases like Levi rents, where wealth and status seem to provide protection.
Right. Easy to imagine other cases where outsiders were blamed because they lacked the resources to fight back.
The Lyon case and Daly and Halligan's story is just such a stark reminder that the ideal of blind justice has often been just that, an ideal, not the reality. Status, ethnicity, religion. They've historically played huge roles in legal outcomes, often with devastating results.
These historical disparities still raise critical questions for us today about fairness and equity.
Absolutely, both in the past and the present.
So as we bring this deep dive to a close, let's just quickly recap the ground we've covered. It's been quite a journey.
It has a serious look at some disturbing events.
We had Elma Sands in the Manhattan, while that enduring unsolved mystery, that early true crime obsession.
Then the Burr-Hamilton dual political violence, questions about justice for the elite.
Gabriel Prosser's rebellion resistance against slavery met with brutal state-sanctioned violence.
And finally, Marcus Lyon's murder, leading to the wrongful conviction of Daly and Halligan, highlighting that systemic bias, the power of prejudice.
These cases seem so different on the surface. A maid, a vice president, an enslaved blacksmith, Irish immigrants.
But when you look closer, they're woven together by these recurring themes, offering real insights into that formative time.
Like the fragility of the justice system back then.
Definitely, its inconsistencies are glaring.
And the huge influence of social status, wealth, prejudice on who got justice and who didn't.
Undeniable. It shaped outcomes dramatically.
Plus, the role of public perception, fueled by early media, is shaping the stories around these crimes.
A powerful force even then.
And underlying it all, the sense that there were countless other speculative crimes, acts of violence and injustice that are just lost to history.
Exactly. Poor records, lack of investigation. We only have fragments of the real picture of crime and justice in early America.
So as you listening to this, reflect on these complex, often troubling stories. Maybe some questions linger. Which of these cases feels the most haunting to you? Why does it resonate?
How have these issues, bias, flaws in the justice system, how have they evolved since then? Or maybe, how haven't they?
And what can these historical cases, these often tragic stories, teach us about how we understand crime and justice today? What lessons are there for our ongoing pursuit of a truly equitable society?
These are crucial questions to ponder. We really hope this deep dive encourages you to explore these themes and stories further. They shape the nation in profound ways.